Good morning and welcome to Focus on the News. I'm Senator Dick Black, and today we have with us our dear friend James Chatras. Jim is just a tremendous hero who spent a lot of time with the in the U.S. Senate, working as a staffer there, and done many other things. Today we're going to talk about the Secret Service blunders that almost facilitated Trump's assassination. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Senator. It's always an honor and a privilege to be with you.
You know, I found it interesting that that President Biden has decided that we need to tone down the rhetoric, since the rhetoric would naturally be directed at the Democrats, at the grotesque failure of the Secret Service run by Joe Biden, and all of a sudden, we need to not say strong things. This is from a president who has said he was going to put President Trump in the bullseye, and it seems he effectively did just that.
Well, it is amazing. This was a mostly peaceful assassination attempt. Look, I mean, you spend years calling the guy Hitler a threat to our country, a threat to our democracy, whatever that amounts to these days. And then you're shocked when somebody goes out there and tries to act on it. And we'll see what kind of profile this fellow has. Although I think we have some real serious questions as to how much honesty or how much objective investigation we'll really hear about this. And I think a lot of people are starting to ask the question about, was this just incompetence that we have now witnesses saying on the scene that they were pointing for minutes at this guy up on the roof with a rifle and calling it to the police attention, that for over 40 seconds, the Secret Service snipers had this guy in their sights and they did not do anything. It's almost as, again, a lot of people saying, was this a stand down order from somewhere to let this thing happen? Now, I don't know. The other thing is, some people you're hearing is saying, well, maybe it was designed to send a message, just shoot him in the ear. That it was not meant to kill him. Everybody I've talked to and you of course, as a very distinguished combat veteran yourself, I'm sure you can affirm this, is that there's no way from that distance you could deliberately try to hit the guy in the ear and have any confidence you could do that without a serious risk of killing him, especially since he's a very animated speaker and he's moving around, that this shot was intended to kill him. And it's just by either accident or miracle, depending on your point of view, that it did not do so.
Yeah, when I was just about the same age as that shooter, I was at Parris Island, South Carolina, and ended up being the top rifle shot in the entire regiment. I will tell you, if somebody had said, I want you to go out and shoot somebody in the ear, I probably could have done it, but the odds that I would have killed him in the process of doing it would have been significant, and I wouldn't have done it. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't have shot a round near the president or in his direction or anything else. But I'm just saying that apparently this young fellow had tried to get on the rifle team at school, and he didn't make it. He wasn't a good enough shot. But I guess his shooting had improved afterwards. He was not a bad shot at all, and he did pretty well. He was firing from distance, I think of something over 400 feet, and was able almost to hit the president. In fact, I know people have talked about the way that the president turned just before that. Had he not, he'd have been hit in the head and killed.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I think what's really upsetting about this, Senator, is that we now live in such a low trust society with regard, when President Biden goes out on video now and says, "Oh, let's calm down the rhetoric, and we need to solve our differences at the battle box," and then he corrects himself and says "battle box" again. That does anybody have any confidence that we will get the real story on this, or that if it was something that was either part of some kind of an effort to remove Trump, or at least to allow something to happen, that it won't happen again? There's been questions about what kind of Secret Service protection he has been afforded. As you know, people are asking that question about the denial of protection to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And what's really going on here? And I don't think anybody trusts the answers we're getting.
Well, the situation with Robert F. Kennedy, it's very interesting because his uncle John F. Kennedy was shot and assassinated in Dallas, Texas. His father, the former Attorney General and then U.S. Senator from New York, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., was shot and killed and assassinated. So here you had this very, very extraordinary family history of assassinations, and I think it just angered the Biden people that somebody would dare to challenge a fellow Democrat, and they decided, maybe the same thing will happen to you. Good luck, fella. And they denied him Secret Service protection, which, even though Kennedy is running against the Republicans, I think it just very much disturbed a lot of Republicans, including myself, probably yourself, the fact that he was denied protection. But the one thing we can count on is the FBI has said that they're investigating, so I'm sure that all the answers will be transparent and honest, don't you think?
Oh yeah, you bet. I mean, we just can sit back and trust that this is in good hands, and we'll get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You also have to wonder that, the story that was really at the top of the headlines before this happened was what was going to happen to President Biden. I mean, it seemed pretty clear to me that the machinery was all turning to replace him. How exactly they would do that, I don't know. And you notice that story has just sort of disappeared for now. I don't know if this changes the dynamic on the Democratic side about replacing him, and about what their prospects are for winning this election. A lot of people right after the shooting said, "Oh, that's it now. Trump's going to win for sure." And I don't know about that. I don't know to what extent that any people who were against Trump will now be for him because of this. And of course, the people who are supporting him, I think, will be even more intense in their support. I'm not sure in terms of the lay of the land and percentages, it really changes all that much, but I could be wrong about that.
Well, I think it's going to shift some votes towards Trump. He gave quite an impressive performance. His reaction to being shot was one of defiance. He shook his fist, and people understood that I think he said, "Fight on" or something, and the crowd began to roar "USA, USA" as he was being taken off the stage, bloodied, but certainly not defeated. I think that was pretty impressive. But the thing that is likely to have the more lasting impact, even if he picks up a point or two, is the fact that it is going to mobilize Republican turnout. And it pretty effectively squelches the lingering never Trumper faction of the party. That's my guess, is that's where the real impact will be. But now, we have, going back to this thing we touched on, that we've got Biden saying, let's tone down the rhetoric. And I can't help but remember how fiercely the Democrats drummed up the race riots after George Floyd killed himself on an overdose of fentanyl, and they made it look as though the police had done something untoward, and there was never a moment that for the next year and a half where there wasn't active incitement by the Democratic Party to violence, where they were, they said, oh, these are mostly peaceful demonstrators, as they rampaged down streets, chasing white people, beating them, sometimes breaking their bones, as they were assassinating dozens of good police officers, people who'd just be sitting in their cars, and then a bunch of these thugs would come up and just gun them down and murder them right where they stood. I remember there was a woman, I forget whether it was in St. Louis, but anyway, she was a woman police officer who encountered a couple of these people, and they somehow the circumstances, she fled because she was outnumbered, and they chased her, they gunned her down, and as she was begging for her life, they just executed her right on the floor. And she left behind a family, a couple of kids. And so this was going on, and there was not a word of criticism, not a word, a whisper of criticism from the Democrats. Everywhere they went, they defended it. They talked about how white people were oppressors, how back in the days of slavery, the slave owners were just out there raping all of their slaves, which was a crock. I mean, that was just, there was no substance to that in history or anything else. So they were doing all these things to generate hatred. And so I just think it's kind of ironic that now that the shoe is on the other foot, they're saying, well, can't we all just get along?
Yeah. Well, we've had this years of conditioning where left-wing violence is speech and right-wing speech is violence. And just a completely different standard here. And you saw so many people in the immediate aftermath of this from the left essentially saying, too bad they didn't get him. Too bad that he didn't aim better. And, and I think it's just pure hypocrisy now to call for turning down the rhetoric. And what I suspect, Senator, is what we're going to see is a phenomenon similar to what we see, for example, when we see some, radical Muslim attack, a jihad attack, and the immediate reaction is, well, let's not have any kind of anti-Muslim backlash here. I mean, let's not blame innocent Muslims for what a minority does. And what I expect to see here is that we're going to see a lot more heightened vigilance and denunciation of right-wing violence, because as we know, the Trump supporters now will respond with violence, and the white Christian nationalists, fascists, whatever they are, threat to democracy that Trump represents, will be mobilized and vengeful in the wake of this. And that's what we have to be watching out for, not the left-wing violence that has been really unleashed in this country. So my opinion, let's watch for that. I think that's what we're going to see in the near future.
Yeah, it's interesting that they pulled Morning Joe off the show today. This is temporary, but his rhetoric has been so incendiary. I think he made the comment that if Trump were elected, he'd be executing people.
Yeah,
he's just gotten so extreme that it's just quite bizarre, the things that he says. And so, it was certainly a good act of judgment by the liberal station he's on to say, okay, well, let's just pull this guy off and not run the risk that he's going to say something that's so incendiary that it'll break through this facade of how we need to tone down the rhetoric. I think everybody is interested to know more about this young fellow who shot the president, or the former president. He he was just about to turn 21, high school graduate. He had gotten an award. There were 20 kids at his school who got awards of $500 for math and science. So apparently an intelligent individual. They made quite a bit of the fact that he was registered as a Republican, but in this area of Pennsylvania is very, very heavily Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you're registered a Republican as a, just as a young person really doesn't tell you too much, because it might be a reflection of his family,
Mm-hmm.
or it might just be the fact that Republicans are the only ones who run registration votes or, campaigns out there where they'll go into different schools, churches, different things, and they'll register people to vote, knowing that the bulk of people in that area are Republican. So being registered for the first time that way really doesn't give much indication at all. In fact, my daughter, who was my chief of staff, I think you may know Michelle, and as Republican as you can get, but she said, when I first registered to vote, I was a registered Republican or a registered Democrat, because she said they were the ones who were registering. They said, hey, you want to be registered to vote? She said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. Signed up. I don't think she even knew which party it was.
Sure.
They were just saying you want to register, because for Democrats, they felt like if you register young people in California, most of them are going to be Democrats. And so I don't make too much of the fact that he was registered as a Republican, not at that age. What I do make a lot out of, he made a $15 contribution to a Democrat political action committee called the Progressive Turnout Project. And the group's website says, Progressive Turnout Project is the largest voter contact organization in the country, specifically dedicated to mobilizing the Democratic Party and defending democracy. Our mission, rally Democrats to vote. Now, $15 doesn't sound like much. I will tell you, my first political contribution was $10 that I gave to a very fine Republican senator. And I didn't know how much political contributions were. But we put down a few bucks, and to my wife and I, it kind of signified that we were all in for this guy, and we're ready to be volunteers and do all this other stuff. So you don't want to understate the meaning of a small donation for a person of modest means. And so to me, the fact that he gave to this Democrat vote is pretty significant, much more significant than how, as a young man, he was registered. But we don't know too much about him, and obviously the best way would be to go on to social media, but I'm sure that the FBI has taken control of that so that it won't be lost. We can count on them for doing that, can't we?
Yes, I understand. I was just listening earlier today that all of his social media was immediately taken down. It kind of reminds me of that when you had that transsexual person who killed a bunch of Christian kids in Tennessee, and they wanted to cover up that manifesto so you couldn't see what that person's reasons were. Again, because you don't want to blame the political point of view that has been fanned in this country for an act like this. Whereas, of course, if you have somebody who commits like a racist killing, like that guy in, I think it was South Carolina or Georgia, then they parade that all over the news to say, oh, look how bad these people are. Look how hateful these people are. So again, if he was motivated by some kind of left-wing, Antifa type, anti-Trump, whatever it is, I think they're going to try to obscure that. And I have to tell you, Senator, I have to be concerned that if this reflects a kind of let it happen mentality, or even worse, I think they very well may try again. I mean, there are a number of unstable people out there. Many of them, as you know, have a history of medication and mental illness or whatever it is, and are easily suggestible if given the right opportunity to do something like this. And I certainly don't rule that out.
Yeah, history has a very powerful example of a situation where somebody who was a bit unbalanced from the beginning was encouraged to take action, because there was one of the most profound events in history that occurred in Germany back in, I guess it was in the 30s, but there was a fire in the Reichstag building, which is sort of the German equivalent of the U.S. Capitol, not quite as big, but a big masonry constructed building that was the seat of the German government. And the individual who started the fire, I think everybody agrees, was a Dutchman who was a very quirky guy, and he came in and he lit the fire that burned down the Reichstag and created a national crisis that led to the election of Adolf Hitler. Mm-hmm. And those who studied the fire and the individual, there's never been a complete disclosure of what happened. Mm-hmm. But I don't think anybody doubts that this was the man, that he did it. But I think the belief is that he was probably encouraged to go ahead and carry this out, and that the people talking to him knew he was going to do it. And the brown shirts, the Nazis went into the Reichstag building and spread some kind of fuel, diesel fuel or gasoline, all through the entire Reichstag. So in walks this fellow, and he goes over to a trash bin and he strikes a match and throws it in, and instead of the trash burning and creating a little bit of smoke and dust and so forth, the entire building, this huge building, immediately bursts into flames and burns to the ground. Yep. And I think that's it's the most plausible explanation is that various agents facilitated and encouraged that. Now you look at what happened here, and I don't know. I couldn't come up with a clear assessment one way or the other, but what was striking about this is that this was in a rural agricultural area. There were very few buildings or firing positions anywhere close to where Trump was, but the most prominent building from which you could get on the roof and fire down, have a good clean shot, was the one where the shooter went, this fellow Thomas Crook. And in fact, I read last night that the Secret Service had identified that particular building as a security threat. And then what happened? Nobody followed through on it.
Yeah, and see, Senator, here's the thing that is most disturbing is that, well, not the most disturbing, it's certain disturbing, is that let's suppose that you have the most innocuous explanation here. This guy was the lone gunman. He was an unstable person. He had whatever his motivations are, which maybe were not mentally sound. And that the only explanation of why he had the opportunity was sheer incompetence. That, somebody dropped the ball and, oh gosh, I mean, how did that happen? The trouble is even if that is what happened exactly, how many people are going to accept those assurances that there's not something more to it? Wait a minute. They're telling us that's all there was to it, and we're supposed to accept that on faith from the people who have lied to us over so many other things, whether it's Syria or Ukraine or the election or January 6th or COVID or every other thing, or the summer of love in 2020 with all the American cities burning down. But trust us, we're telling the truth this time. And that's the trouble. We don't have that trust in our society anymore. Like we were talking on before the show, when President Biden says we settle our differences at the battle box, so let's tone this down. Yeah, sure. We settle our differences at the unguarded drop boxes, where God knows how many ballots from how many people, who are they, or even the real people, are being dropped into these boxes. But we take it on faith that our elections are on the up and up. Unfortunately, we've reached that point in our country where, and Trump is a very polarizing figure between the portion of the population who thinks he's the orange savior and the other portion of the population that thinks he's orange Hitler. And increasingly, there's not a whole lot in between. And that's where our country is going, toward an election that even before this, very few people could expect that each side would accept the outcome of the election as having been fair, free, and to accept the results, whatever it is, on good faith. I don't think we live in that country anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah. I honestly, if Trump loses, I'm going to be extremely skeptical of the outcome. We'll see. I hope that it's fair, but at this point, I believe that the United States has one of the most corrupt voting systems of any nation on earth. Take a look at what just happened in Iran. Mm-hmm. They had a hotly contested election to replace the president of Iran, because the other one had very possibly been assassinated, but he was killed in a helicopter accident. The powers that be wanted the hardliner to win. And as it turned out, the people decided no, and they voted in a reformist and a more moderate individual. Now, you can't really quibble with the results of the Iranian elections. They were free, they were fair. They didn't come out the way that the government wanted them to come out. Mm-hmm. That is the case in our country, where there's just this enormous manufacture of ballots, particularly within the inner cities, where everything is racially controlled, from the judges to the prosecutors to the election officials, right on down to the workers who are able to close the polling places, get all of the Republicans out, and then manufacture ballots late into the night. So we'll see how that works. Let's just turn for a minute to the other possibility that this was just a grotesque case of mismanagement by an inept Secret Service. It was quite amazing watching the reaction of the Secret Service afterwards, where now some of that, I don't want to criticize each individual officer, mm-hmm. but you had a number of very small women who were there, who, at one point they all of the agents huddled around the president to form sort of a human shield around him. And one of them was a woman, and I don't criticize her courage, but the fact is that she was too short to shield the president. The president's a tall man; he's 6'3". The agent was perhaps, 5'4". So he's completely exposed in that place. But you got to pretend, oh well, she's just like everybody else. Well, she isn't. She's not tall enough to shield the president. She's not strong enough to lift the president had he been shot, seriously injured, and couldn't move himself. He's a heavy guy, and then, as you saw, once the president was moved into the armored vehicle, and it began to move away, you had the three women who were spinning and pirouetting helplessly, not knowing what to do, which way to turn. One of the ladies was struggling to holster her pistol. She couldn't get her pistol in the holster. And her main focus is, how do I get this darn gun in this holster, instead of watching and protecting the president. So the Secret Service has this program. It's called 3030, and Secret Service Director Cheadle or Chiatle, I'm not sure, but she's got this 3030 pledge, which means we're going to put 30% women in by the year 3030. And she said she would accomplish this initiative by all means necessary, which I take as a code phrase for, I don't care what the law says, we're going to do it. We're going to have unlawful discrimination based on sex, based on race. We're going to do the DEI thing, no matter what the law says. That's what when I see by all means necessary, that means you don't let the law stand in your way.
That's right, and we're seeing this across the board in our country. Airline pilots, police, fire, military, on and on. And it's, I remember seeing something years ago about fire department standards about how heavy a weight can you carry down a ladder in case of an emergency, simulating carrying a fire victim out of a burning building. And I guess they lowered the standards then because the women are much smaller. So I guess if you're going to be caught in a fire, please try to be on the lighter side so it's easier for the fire person to carry you out of the building. Otherwise, you're in pretty bad shape. I think that that's unfortunately part of the direction our country is going in, and I don't see that. I'd like to think if Trump wins, and I share with you, Senator, I don't think he can lose if it's a fair election. Partly depends on how they handle the whole Biden replacement thing, because again, I think a lot of people who are conservative, who support Trump, tend to also have the herd mentality where everybody I know likes him, so that must be true of the country as a whole. And of course, it's not that simple. But I don't think we have any confidence it will be a fair election. Look what just happened in, for example, the European elections, European Parliament, Britain, France. You could argue about the way the seats were apportioned, the way the electoral system is set up. But I don't think almost anybody in France or Britain has a lack of faith that the ballots were being fairly counted. And in America, we don't have that faith anymore.
No, that's true. And I want to make the point that we're not criticizing, women for the many roles that they fill. When I was in the Army JAG Corps, I supervised more women attorneys in the field than any other officer in the entire Army, in the JAG Corps. Women are good talkers. They make good lawyers, and I had great ones. And one of the things I required is that I found out that there were some of the staff judge advocates who had asked headquarters not to send women because of their particular combat roles or whatever. And so I contacted headquarters. I said, "Hey, look," I said, if you've got women with really sterling academic records, good physical fitness, and if they are willing to become parachutists at a short course that took about 6 weeks at Fort Benning, Georgia, then I'll take them. And of course, you know, I had an artificial screening mechanism because my JAG officers were the only JAG officers outside of the 82nd Airborne who were required to go through jump school. Now, I wasn't in a jump outfit. I was with the 7th Infantry Division or with I Corps at Fort Lewis. And, but I knew that it was a very good screening device that, that these women had to, you know, if you jump out of an airplane with a parachute, the chances are that you've got a real commitment to accomplishing the mission and that sort of thing. And I was very proud of the women JAG officers who worked for me. I would not have wanted them or any other women in frontline battle outfits, not because they wouldn't have been brave, and the ones that I had were very physically fit. But the psychology of combat is totally torn to pieces when you introduce sexual competition between the males for the females, and all of these things that distract from that ethos, that feeling, that psychology that is almost impossible to comprehend. The thing that causes men to charge forward into essentially certain death. And I charge forward because I know you're on my right side and I don't want to look like a coward to you. And you've got me on your left side and you're charging forward because you don't want to look like a coward to me. If you interrupt this mysterious force that compels men forward or compels men to hold the line against all possible odds, you create these countervailing psychologies and it doesn't work, which is why if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, every once in a while you'll see a little trial of using some women in combat, and it never turns out well. And the women are the ones that are touted as being in combat, or it's more sort of a propaganda thing than it is a military thing. Where women are used in fierce hand-to-hand combat, it never goes well, and it hasn't since the beginning of humanity. Even the Russians just don't even toy with it. Ukrainians have been desperate. They've done little trials, but it's never gone anywhere. No. So we're not criticizing the women for the great work that they do in the military, but in certain roles, and I don't think there should be women in the Secret Service.
Well, you know, in the military, of course, the whole purpose of the military ultimately is combat. I mean, that's the purpose of it. And I recall that when they were talking about expanding women's role in the military, one of the arguments was, well, because they aren't serving in combat positions, which is where you really distinguish yourself, and that you're not really being made eligible for the kind of advancement and promotion because you're being barred from the core purpose of the military. So we have to allow them into these roles, which now are open to all of them pretty much. And, you know, that was one of the purpose in the old days of having separate women's corps within the services so that their personnel system and promotion is not dependent on being in combat, but rather is judged by the standards within that corps. And then you have billets that are available to them accordingly. So they're not competing on a direct basis with the males for advancement. And of course, that's all out the window now too. You have to let them in combat now, because otherwise, how would they get a fair chance, fair shake for being advanced with their male colleagues?
Yeah, I would tell you in fierce combat like what we see in the Ukraine war theater, you cannot count on the fact that people will not suddenly find themselves in battle.
Yeah.
I was with a Marine company. I was a pilot, but I was on the ground calling in airstrikes, and we took enormous casualties. We had 34 Marines killed and 81 wounded in a day. And as a consequence, the unit was decimated. The only officers left alive were me and the artillery forward observer. And together we reorganized and reconstituted the company. We received in helicopter loads, H-53 helicopters brought in replacements, and they were almost all truck drivers, military policemen, and a lone Marine Corps tuba player who had been with the Marine Corps band at 8th and I. And within a day or so, I had been ordered by the regimental commander to lead a reconnaissance patrol to head west deep into enemy-held territory. And I took the remnants of 1st Platoon, the survivors who had not been killed in the battle, but probably 2/3 of the platoon were made up of truck drivers, MPs, and we had a guy who could play the tuba like nobody's business, just in case we needed it. But all of them made good infantrymen, and they were out there. They were ready to die if necessary. And we successfully located the withdrawing battalion of the elite 2nd NVA division. So, and from then on, they spent the rest of their time as infantry. So it shows that there are certain things you got to be prepared to use men in men's roles, and certainly the Secret Service is one of those roles.
Yeah. I assume all of them too, including the tuba player, had the appropriate training so that they could go into a combat role without just being thrown in cold, like unfortunately some of these fellows in Ukraine now that are being swept up and given very, very minimal training and being thrown in just to die. It's criminal, really.
That's a good point, Jim. The Marine Corps provided the same basic training for all Marines, and then they would go from basic training to the advanced, well, not advanced, but to the infantry training regiment, so that we all threw grenades, we all fired, at the time it was 3.5 rocket launchers, we fired flamethrowers, different things. We learned, basic infantry tactics. So you're right, they had that training, and that was one of the things that gave the Marine Corps great depth, is this concept, every Marine and infantryman. And well, in any event, we'll see. We haven't figured out whether it was simply grotesque mismanagement and leadership failure by the Secret Service, or whether it was something perhaps more sinister.
Yeah.
But we know that it needs to be fixed. We're glad that there are people looking at it, and certainly the nation is in prayer of thanks that President Trump was not assassinated. And we'll see where we go from here, Jim.
Well, yeah. On that note, yes, I think some portion of the nation is in prayer of thanks, and there's another portion of the nation that is sorry they didn't get him, and that's the sad commentary right now. So it's going to be an interesting period between now and November.
Amen to that. Well, listen, this has been Focus on the News. Thank you for being with us, Senator Black and Jim Jatras. wish you a good week, and we will see you next Monday. Well, Jim, I think we may have,
Are we still on?
we are still on. I think Jose must have, so Jose, are you there? I think he must have faded out. All right, we're going to sign off now.
We'll just sign off.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. We'll see you later.
I'll leave the studio. Bye-bye.